In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the other types of variables and lists that we have at our disposal in Command Lua. First of all, a quick little review of variables. Basically, a variable is a placeholder for a value. We can have different types of variables, such as a variable that holds a number, a variable that holds a word, or even a variable that actually is a bit more complicated variable that would actually hold multiple values, known as a list. Regardless of the different types of variables that you're using inside of Lua, the important thing is that whenever you redeclare a variable, it is always going to be going ahead and making sure that that existing value of that variable is going to be overwritten with the previous value. So in this case, if I actually were to run this code, there'd be no consequences whatsoever. We've basically taken the value of variable and we've simply rewritten it 3 times. In this case, the most recent value of our thing called var is simply going to be those 2 items that we have inside of this list. Keep in mind that all variables also have scope, which is basically going to define where they're used and how they are stored. Making a variable a local variable is simply a matter of typing out the word local in front of it and then simply attaching it. Anything that is local is only going to be used for the duration of the activation of that particular script. So in this particular case, if we want to create a really basic loop, you'll notice that my loop here showed a value of 1, and then when it exited the loop, let me go ahead and make this a little bit more clear, it printed the original value of variable, in which case here. So you can run into a very interesting situation where you have a local that has a local that has a local that has a global that has a local. You just need to be very careful with that scope because you could run into situations where you accidentally overwrite an existing value of a variable. Keep in mind, all variables do not require any specific type of typecasting. They simply assume the appropriate type based on what you've done here. So in this particular case, if I wanted to set this to a value of 1.0, it's going to know that we're dealing with a different type of value automatically. In this case, it recognizes it as a float variable as opposed to an integer variable. Now, the next thing we're going to take a look at is lists. Lists come up everywhere inside Command. Basically, a list is going to give us the ability to see multiple items in a very long format that we can dig down deep into. Each one's going to have its own properties. Each one's going to have its own different pieces. To give you an idea of how many items can be stored in a single list, we'll go ahead and write up a basic script that will go ahead and give us all the details we need of a given unit all organized. In this case, we'll start by creating a local variable. We'll go ahead and call it unit. And we'll say use the special command called selected units. We'll do selected units. And then we're now going to say what we want out of this particular item. So now if I wanted to, and I want to print unit, watch what happens. We're going to notice that we have a table within a table within a table here. In this case, we have our units. Now, for example, if I clicked up here where we have the SAM battalion, if I were to print it now, notice the word units gets replaced with the word contacts. The reason this particular event that is going to happen is because units are things we have. Contacts are things that we are assuming are targets in their current positions. We never actually have access to the other team's units. So let's go ahead and run that again. And again, we can see we have this wonderful little list of different items that comes here. But realistically, what happens if we select more than one unit at a time? Let's try the script again. Okay, we can see we've now gotten ourselves a group. Let's see what happens if I select more than one of these at a time. Now we have a list of a list of a list. So the problem we can run into quickly is we're going to want to have some sort of context within what we've done here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you one of the powerful uses of lists, and that's extracting specific items. In this particular case, this particular list holds 2 smaller lists. The first one's going to be called units. The second one's going to be called contacts. So for example, if I were to grab all of this and now run the scenario, you're going to see that I get a huge collection of 2 different pieces here. So what I want to do is drill down to just the units. So what I'm going to do is come to the end of my function here and simply type in period units. Now, if I run this, it's going to automatically ignore all of the contacts and only give me a list of the units, in which case I'll grab everyone here and press run again. And you can see very clearly that it's only giving me the list of those. Now, what I want to do now is go ahead and take a look at just the first selected unit here. So to do that, we're going to have to use the different types of functions to activate items inside of the list. In our case, all I'm going to simply do here is add a left square bracket, put a 1, and then do a right square bracket. Now, if I press run, you can see that it's going to give me item 1. Now, you're probably sitting here going, wait a minute. I run it again. You'll notice I've gotten something different. In this case, if I selected both of them, the first item selected is going to be the first item that we can see here. In this case, by taking a look up at selected, we can see that the DDG 1000 zoom vault is going to be the first one that we're going to have inside this list. Now, where we're going to run into problems is if we try to call something that we do not have selected. So if I press run, we're going to get this thing that says nil. The reason that says nil is, remember, we only have two items in our list here, and since we try to access a third item, that's not going to work. Likewise, if we tried to go with the traditional method of saying give me units of 0, we're going to end up again with this particular item. Because of the way this works, we're going to be accessing them by their not index, but by their relative index, which is going to be, in this particular case of this particular list, is going to be the number 1. So that's going to make things a little bit more complicated for us. Let's take a look at another example. Let's go ahead and create a fake list of units here, just to show this off a little bit more. We'll go ahead and say a car, and we'll go ahead and say a truck. Now go ahead and print units. Whoop. Run that real quickly. And we can have a car and a truck. Now, if I wanted to say print units of 1, you'll see that it prints car, because in this particular system that we're using here, this special dictionary list, item 1 here in this particular case is a car. That is not the index, it is the item of it. So that is going to mix things up a little bit, and it's going to be a common thing that you're going to run into depending on what you're trying to do here. Now, where we can get a little more sophisticated is, remember, each one of these items that we've extracted a moment ago are actually their own small little list of things as well. So we could actually come in here and say, give me unit number 1 that we have selected, and now give me property number 1 out of that particular item. Now, if we ran it, you're going to notice we get the word nil. Now, if I said, give me number 0 here, you're going to notice we also get a nil. Now, you're probably saying, well, wait a minute, what happened there? Well, let's go take a look at this unit real quick, and maybe you'll see what happened. Remember, it's going to be taking it by the name. It's not going to be taking it by the index. In this case, what we really wanted to say was to take, instead of the value, the property. In this case, we're going to say, quote, name. And now we're going to run it. And we expect the value now to be displayed to say the individual ship. In this case, it tells me it is the zoom vault because that is the name property. Now, if we wanted to come over here and say, I actually wanted to have the GUID here, if I ran this as well, you'll see that I get just the GUID value here as well. So it's something you're going to have to watch out for when you're working with lists. Now, keep in mind, you can have a list within a list within a list as well. And that comes up a lot when you're dealing with things such as courses or waypoints, where you're going to have multiple items that you're going to have to break down into. It is possible to reference these items directly should you need to do so. It is also worth noting at this time that Lua considers lists to also be tables. And often when you're looking at different types of vocabulary for working with it inside of Lua, you're going to see the word table as opposed to list. It's going to have a slightly different connotation, but it's going to work roughly the same way. So now what we're going to do is take a look at a couple other table functions that we have at our disposal. Let's say we want to go ahead and create a nice blank table. We'll go ahead and call it units again, and we'll make it blank. Now let's say we want to add an item to that particular table. We simply type in the word table, dot, insert, left parenthesis, the name of our table, and now what we'd like to add to it. In this case, we can go ahead and say car, keep it nice and simple. We'll go ahead and do the same process again. We'll go ahead and print out what's inside of our table. And let's see what we get for a result. You can see item 1 is known as car, and item 2 is known as truck. So you can see immediately. So of course we can get a little more sophisticated here, and we can add a table into the table. Again, be very, 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 very careful with any sort of curly brackets. So now if I run it, you can see that I run into this whole entire pile where each one of these has its own set of data basically set directly inside of it. Now, one of the things that also makes tables so powerful is we can actually name our values in our tables rather than using simple numbers. So for example, under my units here, I could go ahead and say type. And I can simply say age equals. Actually, we want to be a little bit more careful here because type is a protected word. We'll do type. And we'll go ahead and say age. So now when we run this, you'll see that our little list has a bit for type as well as age rather than a unique number. So the reason this is so powerful now is if I wanted to get the first item inside of my table here, I can see that I get a car that is age old. Now, if I wanted to get the type of that first unit, I can simply now come in here like this and get the exact item, exact property, all the way drilled down in that table, which makes this so much more powerful for the purposes of what you're probably going to be using it for inside command programming. Now, note that you can also remove items from a table should you need to do so. The command for that is relatively straightforward. Now, I'm simply going to type in the word table, remove the table you're working with, and then what you want to remove. Where this is going to get very, very challenging is you're going to be running into situations where you need to remove something by a specific age. In this case, what would have happened if I tried to remove units of 1, for example, and then I'll go ahead and print units again. Let's see what happens. You'll notice it deleted that, and it also told us what its name was. And then you can see what's left in my list is this. So now where this gets a little more complicated is what would happen if I want to type and get rid of the age of unit 1. In order to do something like that, what you would actually have to do is drill into that particular item, delete that from that specific spot. And that's going to get a little bit more challenging as far as trying to get it. You could do something that would say, for example, units of item 1 equals table.remove, and then you could say units of 1, and then try to get rid of that first value. In this case, I would be interested in getting rid of age. This gets a little convoluted and a little bit tricky, so it's very, very dangerous deleting individual properties from individual units that you're working from. Other things you can do with tables, of course, is you can display each item inside of a table if you want to work quickly and efficiently. We can go ahead and use the print command to go ahead and display that as we've seen before, or as we saw in the beginning, we can also create a quick little iterator, for the purposes of going through each one of the units. So we can print K, which is going to be the iterator, and we can print V, which is going to be the value. Let's go ahead and take a look. I'll get rid of this one from above, run it, and now you can see that it breaks it all down for us quite nicely. Now, if I wanted to, for example, get to the age, or I will go ahead and get the type of each kind. Now, if I go ahead and press the run key again, you'll see that it gets me car and it gets me truck, as well as what item inside of my list that we're looking at. This is, again, a very, very powerful way to go through all the units in a given scenario and do something individually to them. As we've seen, using the different types of functions as far as tables are very, very strong. Again, think of a table as a slightly souped up version of a list or an array, which allows us to name our individual properties.